On the night when the mountains of North Korea seemed to exhale death, when the cold dropped so brutally that rifles froze shut and eyelids fused together every time a man blinked, 14,000 Marines found themselves encircled by almost 10 times their number at a place history would rename the Chosin Reservoir, a place where survival wasn't merely unlikely, it was mathematically impossible. The temperature fell to -40, the kind of cold that turned breath to crystals and blood to sludge. And as the Chinese Ninth Army swept down the ridgelines like a living avalanche, the Marines realized they were no longer fighting a war, they were fighting nature, time, starvation, and the slow collapse of the human body itself. Yet somehow, men who should have died in minutes fought for 17 days straight, crawling, limping, dragging the wounded, firing weapons heated over makeshift gasoline fires, improvising bandages from torn socks when their med kits froze solid, and holding positions that had no tactical value except the fact that if they fell, the entire column would be swallowed alive. To understand how they survived, you have to imagine what the cold does to you at -40. Your lungs burn, your fingers stiffen until they crack open like rotten wood, your sweat freezes inside your clothes and becomes ice armor that slices your skin with every movement. And every calorie your body burns is a negotiation with death. And still these men marched, inch by inch, mile by mile, through ambushes so close the muzzle flashes lit up the snow like strobe lights, through valleys that echoed with human screams muffled by wind, through days where they carried wounded Marines whose legs had turned black with frostbite, men who begged to be left behind so the column could keep moving but were refused because the Marines had one rule left: no man gets abandoned. Survival became an act of discipline, an act of routine. Eat your frozen rations like a slab of ice, drink water only when you can melt snow without poisoning yourself, keep your socks dry because wet socks mean dead feet, sleep in 30-second blinks because the moment you fully drift off the cold will stop your heart, and above everything else, follow the man in front of you even if you're hallucinating angels, wolves, or your childhood home in the distance, because stopping meant dying. And yet the truly impossible part wasn't that they escaped. It's how they fought their way out, how engineers built bridges out of blown-apart metal while under machine gun fire, how Navy pilots dropped supplies by hand because their parachutes froze mid-air, how corpsmen treated wounds with morphine syringes that had to be warmed in their mouths before injecting, how a chaplain named Father Riley walked up and down the line praying over men whose faces were frozen masks of blood and snow and grief, how entire companies fought with weapons wrapped in blankets because steel left bare would fuse to human skin, how officers planned tactics on maps that snapped in half because the paper had turned brittle as glass, how trucks had to be kept running 24/7 otherwise the oil would gel and the engines would die forever, how men learned to hold ammo under their armpits to keep the brass warm enough to fire, how wounded soldiers were stacked in trucks like cords of wood but still joked with each other to stay awake, and how one Marine, after a grenade blew off half his boot, tied his foot back together with radio wire and kept marching. But the secret to survival at Chosin wasn't firepower or tactics, it was the collective refusal to break, a stubbornness bordering on insanity, a belief that if one man kept moving then the man behind him would too. And so the column crawled across ice sheet roads where one wrong step meant a truck sliding off a cliff, through ambushes that came from every direction and vanished into the snow like ghosts, past bodies frozen in the exact pose they died in, kneeling, standing, curled up, as if time itself had paused mid-sentence, and after 17 days of the harshest retreat in modern military history, the survivors finally reached the safety of Hungnam Harbor, frostbitten, starved, hollow-eyed, carrying the memory of every man who didn't make it. And when a reporter asked General O.P. Smith if this was a retreat, he gave the line that became legend: retreat? Hell. We're just advancing in a different direction, because to the men of Chosin, survival wasn't luck, or fate, or even heroism. It was the decision, made thousands of times over, one step at a time, to live when everything around them insisted they should die. And that's how 14,000 men walked out of a frozen hell alive, not because they had to, but because they refused not to. And that defiance is why the word Chosin still causes a quiet, reverent pause among those who understand what it means to survive when survival shouldn't be possible.